they didn't hear me come in. I still had my key, the one my daughter had pressed into my palm 12 years ago when they first moved into the house on Birchwood Lane, back when she still called me every Sunday morning before the coffee finished brewing. The front door sticks in October. Always has. You have to lift the handle slightly and push with your shoulder, and I still knew exactly how to do it without making a sound. Some things your body remembers even when your heart wishes it could forget. I had driven 40 minutes to surprise her. I had baked an apple pie the night before, the kind with the lattice crust, the kind her father used to say smelled like a real home, and I had wrapped it carefully in a dish towel printed with sunflowers. I was standing in the entryway with the pie still warm in my hands when I heard her voice coming from the kitchen. She was on the phone. I could tell by the pauses, the way she laughed at something only she could hear. I took one step forward, ready to call out to her, ready to see her face do the thing it used to do when I appeared unexpectedly, that open, unguarded smile, the one that reminded me of when she was 7 years old, and I picked her up from school on the last day before summer. Then I heard what she was saying. I love her, obviously. But Mom is just, she's a lot right now. She calls too much. She shows up. Last week, she rearranged my pantry, which, a pause, a laugh. I know. But we have our own lives. Ryan and I have talked about it. We just think she needs to understand that she can't keep inserting herself. She's getting to that age where it's going to become a real problem. I stood completely still. Honestly, between you and me, I don't know how much longer we can keep doing the holidays the way we've been doing them. It's exhausting. She gets her feelings hurt so easily. Everything is a big deal to her. The pie was still warm in my hands. I could smell the cinnamon. I set it down on the entryway table as quietly as I could, and I let myself back out the same way I came in. I sat in my car for a long time before I started driving. My name is Dorothy, and I am 68 years old. I live alone in the house where I raised 2 children, in a neighborhood that has grown quieter every year since my husband passed. The oak tree in the front yard still has a notch carved into the bark, my daughter's initials, her and some boy she liked in middle school, whose name neither of us can remember now. I have a vegetable garden in the back that I tend every morning. I have a dog named Chester who sleeps at the foot of my bed and snores like a freight train. I have a life, a real one, and until about 6 months before that October afternoon, I believed I still had a place in my daughter's. I had not always been easy. I knew that about myself. After my husband died, I'd leaned on her too hard for a while, called more than I should have, driven down on weekdays without warning. I was grief-struck and untethered, and she was the only solid thing I could find to hold on to. She had been patient then, genuinely patient, and I had loved her for it. I thought I had corrected course. I thought the calls had become more appropriate, the visits more spaced out. I had joined a book club. I had taken a watercolor class on Thursday mornings. I had, very deliberately, tried to build a life that did not depend entirely on her kitchen table. Apparently, it hadn't been enough. I did not call her that week. I told myself I needed time to think. Time to hear the words again without the raw shock of them. Time to figure out what was real and what was the particular cruelty of overhearing a half conversation. I gave myself that week. I cleaned out closets. I had lunch with my friend Louise, who had her own complicated feelings about her children and never made me feel foolish for having mine. I took Chester on longer walks in the evenings and watched the leaves come down from the oaks and tried to be honest with myself about what I had heard. She thought I was a burden. She had used that word, getting to that age, as if I were a weather event she was preparing for, something slow-moving and inevitable and unwelcome. I had wiped down her baseboards. I had driven her to her surgery 2 years ago and slept in the hospital chair for 2 nights without complaining. I had watched her children on 14 separate occasions this past year alone, not because she asked nicely, but because she called at 6 in the morning and I was already awake, And I said yes, because saying yes to her felt like breathing. I had hemmed her daughter's Halloween costume with a needle and thread by lamplight because the sewing machine was already packed in the car and I didn't want to unpack it, she had said. I called her on a Sunday, 2 weeks after, not because I was ready, but because I am not a woman who avoids things. I asked if we could have lunch. Just the two of us, I said. I wanted to talk. We met at a place she liked, a salad restaurant with big windows and small portions, and the kind of ambient noise that makes it easy to ignore what's being said at the next table. She seemed pleased that I'd suggested it. She ordered a glass of sparkling water and asked about Chester, and told me about her daughter's new teacher. I waited until the food came. I need to tell you something, I said. And I need you to hear me out before you respond, I told her. Not dramatically, not with tears or accusations. I told her I had come to the house with a pie. I told her what I heard. I told her I had spent 2 weeks turning it over in my mind, and I wasn't angry so much as I needed her to know that I was aware and that I wanted to understand what she actually needed from me and what I had done that felt like too much. She put her fork down. For a moment I thought she would cry or apologize, and something in my chest rose slightly. Then she said, "You were listening to a private conversation. I wasn't listening. I heard, 'You should have made yourself known.'" "I should have," I said. "You're right. But I also heard what I heard." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, carefully, "Mom, I was venting. Everyone vents. You can't hold me to something I said in a private moment. I'm not holding you to anything. I'm asking you if it's true." She looked out the window. A long pause. "I just think," she said finally, "that you need to find more of your own things, your own people. It's not healthy for either of us. If I'm your whole social life, I had a book club. I had Louise. I had a watercolor class on Thursday mornings. I did not say any of this. I think that's fair," I said instead. "I've been working on that. I know, and I appreciate it." She picked her fork back up. "But it's still a lot sometimes. I hope you can understand that." I nodded. I finished my salad. I paid for both of us, as I always did. And I hugged her in the parking lot and told her I loved her. And I drove home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. I had tried honest conversation. I had opened the door as wide as I knew how to open it. What came back through it was the information that my feelings were less important than her right to have spoken them privately, and that the solution to my loneliness was to become more self-sufficient, rather than for her to become more present. I heard her. I understood her. And then I began, very quietly, to make some changes. The first call I made was to a man named Gerald Whitmore, who had been my attorney for 20-some years and who had drawn up my will after my husband died. Gerald had an office above a dry cleaner on Main Street and kept a bowl of hard candies on his desk that he never offered to anyone, and a framed photo of a beagle named Franklin who had died in 2019. He was meticulous and kind, and he did not ask unnecessary questions. "I'd like to revisit some things," I told him. "When's your next opening?" He saw me on a Thursday, after my watercolor class. I had paint on my left wrist when I walked in, and he pretended not to notice. I had never been a wealthy woman, but I had been a careful one. My husband and I had paid off the house 20 years ago. We had saved consistently, not lavishly, but consistently. There was the house, which had appreciated considerably since we bought it. There were 2 accounts that had grown steadily for decades. There was a collection of jewelry, some of it modest, one piece not modest at all, a ring my husband's mother had brought over from Ohio, a ruby set in yellow gold that my daughter had been expecting to inherit since approximately the age of 16. I did not change everything. I want to be clear about that. I am not a woman who operates on spite. There is a difference between reconsidering what someone has earned and punishing them for something they said when they thought they were alone. But I was 68 years old, and I had a right to decide who should carry the things I had spent a lifetime building. And I had a granddaughter, my son's daughter, 17 years old and sharp as a tack, and already accepted to a pre-nursing program, who had called me twice a week every week since she was 14, not because she needed anything, just because she liked talking to me. She asked about my garden. She asked about the books I was reading. She asked what it had been like to be young in the decade I was young in, and she listened to the answers with what I can only describe as genuine interest. She had sent me a card for my birthday in September with a note inside that said, "You are the person I want to be when I'm older." I mean that. I changed the ruby ring. I changed the beneficiary on one of the accounts. I added a clause about the house that my daughter's attorney would have a very detailed time explaining to her someday. Gerald did not ask questions. He made his notes, had me review everything carefully, and said he would have the updated documents ready by end of the following week. On the way home, I stopped at a nursery and bought 2 rose bushes for the back garden. I have no idea why. It just seemed like the right thing to do. I did not tell my daughter what I had done. That was deliberate. This was not a message. It was not a warning. It was not leverage. I want to be very precise about this. I did not change my will to punish her, and I did not change it to make her behave differently, and I would not be calling her to describe the changes and wait for the remorse to arrive. That is not who I am. I changed it because when I sat in Gerald's office with my watercolor-stained wrist and looked at the document that had been sitting unchanged for 6 years, I saw a woman who had written it from a place of guilt and obligation and grief, who had allocated her life's work based on who she felt she owed rather than who she chose. I had written that will 3 months after my husband died, in a fog, desperately trying to make sure everyone was taken care of, and I had not looked at it since. I was not in a fog anymore. I spent November rearranging things, not in anyone else's pantry in my own life. I said yes to Louise when she asked if I wanted to drive up to her cousin's lake house for a long weekend. I had not taken a trip for pleasure, solo, without someone's schedule dictating my own, in almost 4 years. We drove up on a Friday morning in a light rain and arrived to find the lake gray and still and beautiful, and I sat on the dock with a cup of coffee for an hour without speaking to anyone and felt something loosen in my chest that I had not realized was tight. I called my son more. He lived in Portland, which had always made it easy to keep our relationship at a comfortable distance. Neither of us had to pretend we could pop by. He was a quiet man who had his own complicated feelings about his own complicated life, and we had the specific warmth of people who like each other genuinely without demanding too much. When I told him, carefully and without too much drama, that I had been feeling less connected to his sister lately, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "She's always been better at taking than giving, Mom." I did know that. I had known it for a long time and had loved her anyway, and had told myself it was simply the way some people were wired, that it was not a character flaw but a temperament, and that my job as her mother was not to require her to be a different person. I still believed all of that, but I was also 68 years old, and I was allowed to decide how much energy I had to spend on one-directional love. I did not stop loving her. Please understand that. I did not stop calling on her birthday and her children's birthdays. I did not stop showing up to the school play and the holiday recital. I did not construct a wall between us or begin keeping score in some bitter ledger. I did not say anything cold or withholding or sharp. I was her mother, and I would be her mother until I stopped breathing. I just stopped driving 40 minutes with a warm pie. I stopped rearranging my week to be available at the last minute. I stopped picking up on the second ring. I stopped arriving at her house with my hands full of things I thought she needed, as if love were a grocery delivery. I started letting some calls go to voicemail. Not all of them. Not cruelly. Just not all of them. She noticed by December. She called me on a Sunday. which was unusual. She asked if I was okay. She said she felt like I'd been distant. I told her I had been busy, which was true. I told her the watercolor class had added a second session on Wednesday mornings and that Louise and I were planning another trip in January. All of this was also true. "Are you upset with me?" she asked. "About the lunch thing?" "No," I said. "I heard what you needed. I'm trying to give you more space. A pause. I didn't mean for you to disappear. I haven't disappeared. I'm right here." Another pause, longer. "Ryan's parents are coming for Christmas. We're going to his family this year. I wanted you to know." "That sounds nice," I said. My son called me 3 days later and said he and his wife and my granddaughter were thinking of driving down for the new year and was my guest room available. I told him it absolutely was. I bought new linens. I started planning what I would cook. There is a version of this story where my daughter sweeps back in with an apology that rearranges everything, where she realizes what she said and what it cost, and where we stand in my kitchen together, crying, and understand each other more fully, and the distance becomes the thing that saved us. I have been asked, in the months since, whether I think that will happen. Maybe. People are capable of surprising you. But I have stopped building my life around that possibility. I have stopped holding space in my chest for the version of her that appears in my imagination, the one who calls early on Sunday mornings, the one who says without being asked, "Mom, you are not a burden. You never could be." I loved that version of her. I may love her still in the way you love something you made with your own hands, even after it becomes its own thing entirely. Even after it no longer resembles you. But I am 68 years old, and my husband has been gone for 6 years. And last Thursday, I painted the best watercolor I have ever painted, a view of the lake from the dock, the gray-green water, the far tree line, and my instructor held it up and showed it to the class and said, "This one has real feeling in it. This one has lived experience." I drove home through the October trees, and I thought about what she said. Lived experience. As if all those years of early mornings and school lunches and hemmed Halloween costumes and hospital chairs had been deposited somewhere, not lost, not wasted, not invisible, just waiting for me to learn how to use them. The apple pie I had left on the entryway table that afternoon. I found out later she had thrown it away, thought someone had left it by mistake. She mentioned it offhandedly, months later, in the way you mention something that doesn't matter. I did not tell her it was mine. Chester was asleep in his spot by the radiator when I got home. I scratched behind his ears and he made a sound like pure contentment, and I stood in my own kitchen, in my coat and my scarf, and let the warmth of the house settle over me. I had a pot of soup on the stove from the morning. I had a library book on the counter I had been wanting to get back to. I had 3 messages on my phone. One from Louise about the January trip. One from my granddaughter about something funny that had happened at school. One from Gerald Whitmore's office confirming the updated documents were filed and on record. Everything was in order. I changed into comfortable clothes. I ladled out a bowl of soup. I sat down at my kitchen table and I read my book for an hour. And Chester moved from his spot by the radiator to the warm place beside my feet. And outside the oak tree stood in the last of the light, my daughter's initials still carved into the bark, permanent as everything that cannot be undone, softer than everything I used to think was owed to me. I have learned, at 68, that love does not require an audience to be real. I loved her before she could tell me she was loved. I will love her after I am no longer here to say it. But love is also not a transaction. Not a debt, not a balance sheet where one person deposits and the other spends, and no one ever totals the columns. It is not nothing, what I carried for 39 years. It was not nothing, the pie, but I am learning to bake for myself now, too. To set the table for one, and call it enough. To look at a gray October lake and paint it the color it actually is, without making it prettier than it was, without softening the clouds or warming the water. Just the thing itself, seen clearly, held with both hands. Just a life, still going, still mine.